CEO goes incognito and discovers shocking truth about employee. What he found will inspire you. Mark Reynolds peered at his reflection in the glass window of the elevator as it descended to the lobby. The sleek image of the Silicon Valley CEO clashed violently with the weight in his chest. He had fought hard to be here, creating a startup from the ground up, escaping a working-class existence. The finish line he thought he had crossed revealed an entirely different race, one where his success felt more like a gilded cage than a badge of honor. Ignoring his anxieties felt easier than facing the truth. He had lost touch with the very people who had fueled his journey. Determined to reconnect, he donned the guise of a fresh intern. But as he slipped into the bustling workplace cloaked in a hoodie, the reality was much harsher than he anticipated. The energy buzzed with enthusiasm, but the underlying tension skittered across the air like static electricity. Mark navigated tables strewn with open laptops, half-finished prototypes, and the feverish buzz of creative minds. Yet, in this hive of innovation, whispers of stress and exhaustion pulsed louder than any collaborative triumph. Then, he met Mia, the software engineer tucked away in a corner. Her eyes flickered between exhaustion and brilliance, an unsung hero in a world that only celebrated the loudest voices. As he got to know her, conversations turned toward her grueling days that blurred into late nights, augmented by the agony of caring for her sick mother. Mark's heart clenched. Her loyalty against the backdrop of heartache felt like a mirror reflecting his own upbringing. He saw how her potential shimmered, stifled beneath the weight of office politics that favored charisma over dedication. Unease gripped him. Mia's story revealed the glaring truth that his company, which he believed guided by merit, had, in fact, crafted a hierarchy that smothered the hardworking. The tension within him was palpable. What kind of leader had he become? His drive for success had clouded his ability to discern who truly mattered. When he discovered Mia was passed over for a well-deserved promotion, anger surged a torrent against the complacency he once thought didn't exist in his domain. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The hackathon took shape as a fire in Mark's gut. It had to be bold, raw, and honest. It was a chance to lift voices that often went unheard. Yet, dread coiled tightly in his stomach as he worried whether his efforts would simply shine a spotlight on his oversight. Employees were fidgety, navigating their internal battles while seeking approval from the very powers trying to stifle their potential. The tension crescendoed amid the competitive spirit, and Mark felt the walls around him closing in. Then came the day of reckoning. An internal presentation left him face to face with the board that had become a fortress of overvalued image and underappreciated talent. The atmosphere teetered on the edge of chaos as he clutched Mia's name, prepared to unfold her truth to the judgmental gazes that had witnessed too many overlooked aspirations. Would they listen? Or would the machinations of corporate politics trap him in a web of indecision and fear? The room was silent, the air thick with pause, every soul holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. Mark's resolve frayed like the edges of his lucid dreams. Will he stand for what's right, or will he slip further into the shadows of ignorance? The battle for Mia's recognition loomed larger, a beacon of hope amidst the uncertainty. Mark inhaled sharply, the air in the room constricting around his lungs as the weight of expectation bore down on him. Silence enveloped the boardroom, a blanket thick enough to stifle any doubt. They weren't just looking for a presentation, they craved assurance, validation of their decisions, and confidence that they were following the right leader. But Mark felt anything but confident. In that instant, he confronted the man he had become, someone who had risen through the ranks at the expense of the very people he had promised to support. His eyes flicked nervously to the members of the board, stoic and polished, their expressions masked behind corporate facades. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Mia's story echoed like a haunting refrain. She deserved to be heard. Her potential was blurred under half-hearted acknowledgments and the weight of personal struggle, forgotten in the rush of deadlines and bottom lines. Today, I want to talk about one of our most dedicated engineers, Mia Kim, Mark finally said, his voice trembling ever so slightly. It was a small victory against the tide of fear that knitted itself tighter around his resolve. He recalled her late nights and unwavering loyalty, narratives that swirled in a vibrant tapestry of tireless effort and poignant sacrifices. As he spoke, a surprising clarity formed within him, threads of courage weaving their way through the doubt. Mark's heart raced, each beat driving him further into uncharted territory. Mia has contributed significantly to our current pipeline and embodies the innovation we want to celebrate. Yet, despite her remarkable dedication, she was overlooked for a promotion. I can't stand for that, not anymore. The board members stirred, surprise flickering across their faces. Mark watched as some exchanged glances of confusion, while others exhibited signs of disapproval. Their discomfort was palpable. In their world dominated by numbers and performance metrics, they thrived and analyzed insights that rarely considered the human story behind them. Clarity continued to bloom in Mark's gut, a sense of conviction that redefined his approach to leadership. This was not about Mia alone, it was about dismantling the conventions that had led him to this moment, a reckoning not solely for her, but for every employee who had felt unseen. He realized that to advocate for Mia meant he had to challenge the very culture that turned a blind eye to merit and quiet resilience. That he felt a wave of camaraderie with Mia as he stood his ground, determined to dismantle the walls of complacency that had taken root in the fabric of their company. The internal battle of his fears gave way to a recognition of purpose. I urge this board to reconsider Mia's promotion not just as a favor to her efforts but to reflect our values of transparency and authenticity, he stated with newfound strength. Each word became a nail in the barriers built by the status quo. Would they resent him for stepping out of line? Could he withstand the repercussions of jeopardizing their carefully curated image for a cause that felt right? Mark sensed the tension shifting in the room, each board member's expression shifting as they processed his words. Fate hung in the balance. The board's silence only deepened his anxiety but also ignited a fierce resolve within him. Regardless of the outcome, he knew that he had finally chosen a path that could chart a new future. Would they push back against this challenge, or would they embrace a fresh perspective? The echoes of his internal conflict reverberated back, refusing to let him escape the inherent dilemmas of his position as CEO. It was time for confrontation. The moment arrived where he must look not only at the board but also at himself. What legacy would he choose to leave behind? As he awaited their responses, the very essence of his journey hung delicately in the balance. The silence stretched, taut and unyielding. Mark held his breath, waiting for the board to respond. He could feel beads of sweat forming at his temples, the heated glow of the overhead lights becoming invasive. Unless the proverbial hammer fell soon, he feared that the weight of what he had just dared to do would crush him entirely. Finally, the board chair, a woman by the name of Laura, broke the silence. Mark, she began, her voice steady but laced with condescension. We appreciate your enthusiasm for employee engagement. However, reinventing company protocol during a quarterly review may not send the right message. Her words stung. He had expected some resistance, he hadn't expected dismissal. The shadows of doubt crept back in, reminding him of the hesitance he felt within himself just moments ago. Did he truly believe in what he was advocating, or was he stumbling into a fight he couldn't win? I believe in a culture of meritocracy, Laura, he replied, his own voice stronger than he anticipated. Our success hinges on recognizing talent, even if that talent doesn't fit neatly into the criteria we've established. This isn't just about Mia, it's about our ability to evolve as a company. Can we honestly boast about innovation while alienating our most dedicated individuals? Mark's words hung in the air, the tension flipping like a coin. He realized this had become an internal referendum on leadership itself. The room shifted subtly, tension ebbing and flowing like water against the rocky shoreline. Some board members exchanged glances, uncertainty creeping in their expressions as his statements resonated in ways they perhaps hadn't anticipated, yet, he could sense others, the naysayers, tightening their grip on the status quo. It was a stark reminder of how deeply entrenched they were in outdated beliefs. What was innovation, really, if not the willingness to accept discomfort and challenge norms? They pondered his convictions while he wrestled with his own. Could he really change the company's culture, or was he simply a lone voice echoing into an abyss? Then, a flicker of hope embodied by one of the board members, Derek, emerged from the shadows. "Mark's right," he finally said, his voice surprisingly calm. "What might have worked before clearly isn't fueling growth anymore. Perhaps it's time for us to break from tradition." The contrast between Derek's words and Laura's remained electric. A small victory, but Mark knew the battle wasn't over. One supportive voice wouldn't sufficiently disrupt years of established complacency. Would others follow, emboldened by his unilateral challenge, or would they cling to their comforts and reject this budding change? As he watched the debate unfold, he contemplated Mia's situation with increasing intensity. Her unrecognized potential no longer seemed like an isolated incident, it symbolized the larger systemic issues plaguing their industry. Each passing moment pitted him against his former self, the corporate ladder climber who prioritized results over people. Mark had embarked on this quest to support Mia, yet he was unearthing deeper conflicts about himself that he now had to confront. Decisions made in the boardroom could alter lives not just Mia's, but the whole team's. Their responses could sway the pendulum of change or entrench them deeper in outdated practices. Would his actions mark the beginning of a new identity for their company or the end of his tenure as CEO? He squarely faced the board, allowing the weight of his convictions to anchor him. "I'm here to foster a culture where no one is overlooked. And if that means risking everything to stand by what is right, then that's a risk I'm willing to take." With the air thick with defiance, Mark awaited their verdict, aware that his fight was far from won. The question loomed over him, heavy and inescapable: would he find solidarity among the skeptics, or would he discover just how isolated he truly was? As the board members deliberated, Mark realized his journey into leadership had morphed into something greater than himself. He had not only chosen to uplift Mia but to ignite a critical awakening within his own spirit, but as he awaited the board's decision, a nagging doubt lingered. What consequences would arise from this surge of bravery? Would the outcome catapult him forward into a new era, or would it drown him in retribution for challenging the norms? Just as his resolve firmed, the pulse of uncertainty quickened. Would he face the allies he desperately needed, or confront an unexpectedly hostile outcry from those he had once called colleagues? The boardroom buzzed with whispers, fragments of conversations darting through the tension like errant arrows. Mark's pulse quickened as he deciphered the glances exchanged among his colleagues. He could feel the weight of their scrutiny not just on his presentation, but on his character. Did they see him as a leader daring to innovate or a disruptor undermining the very foundation of their work? A moment of clarity broke through the noise. Mark realized this was not merely about Mia, it was about understanding what their company truly valued. It was a test of courage, not just his, but of everyone in that room. Could they elevate themselves over personal interests to advocate for a more humane approach? As he considered this, the faces of his colleagues morphed into mirrors reflecting his inner doubts and aspirations. Derek's voice reverberated in his thoughts as the board continued to deliberate. Mark had witnessed firsthand the impact of acknowledging talent, but the challenge remained stark: he could only bank on Derek's support for so long. Would any others reveal themselves as allies, or was he fighting against a tide that ran far deeper than he could imagine? Laura's sharp glare cut through Mark's thoughts, and he instinctively straightened his posture. He could no longer linger at the periphery of hope. If he wanted to instigate change, it required full commitment. Yes, there was fear, but courage was separate from the absence of fear. It was the willingness to act despite it. Taking a deep breath, he decided it was time to address the board's fear directly. "I understand apprehension," he said slowly, drawing their attention back. "Change can feel like the loss of control, but it can also offer the opportunity to redefine that control. We have to be willing to redefine what success looks like." The room quieted. Mark could see glimmers of surprise ripple through the members as his determination crystallized. Encouraged by their reactions, he pressed on. "Our success should stem not solely from numbers, but from nurturing a workplace where every employee feels valued. Any outstanding results will follow organically from that energy. He wondered momentarily if his passion was shifting the tide. But Laura shook her head subtly, her expression hardened. It dawned on him that confronting her ideology would lead to more than disagreement, it could provide a crucial window into the company's entrenched beliefs. Understanding this was part of his growth. "Mark, with respect," Laura replied, carefully choosing her words, "emotions cannot dictate business. We are here to ensure profitability, not to make everyone happy. Straying from our core principles will only endanger our position in the market." Her words echoed painfully, and Mark's breath hitched. Was his vision merely an idealistic fantasy? No. A growing smolder of instinct ignited within him. Profitability should not trump the well-being of their team. Could they create a balance? He had to believe that leading with humanity could forge profitability in unprecedented ways. As deliberation continued, a new voice broke through the young director, Jess, who had been quiet until this point. "Look, I see both sides, but maybe we're missing the point. We are entering a new era, one where talent is choice-driven. Our employees want meaning, not just a paycheck." A spark of movement shifted among the board. Mark realized that the moment had arrived. This was his opportunity to challenge their mindsets concretely. The quickening pulse of his conviction surged again, playing out in his mind, propelling his next steps. He envisioned what their work atmosphere could transform into, vivid and ultimately compelling, the kind of place that drew in not only talent but also nurtured it. But with this new sense of urgency, a daunting possibility emerged. If they rejected this path, would he remain a part of an organization that perpetuated its own stagnation? Silence once again blanketed the room as members contemplated Jess's words. Would they brave a paradigm shift, or cling to an outdated model? Just then, Mark spotted a flicker of curiosity on Laura's face, her rigid demeanor softened, a shred of hope igniting in the shadows. He understood that while the board's decision hung in the balance, he had already embarked on an internal transformation that could not be reversed, but as he focused on the potential for change, he couldn't help but wonder, if they did accept this new perspective, how would he navigate the complexities of leading everyone into the unknown? What would that leadership demand of him, and would he be ready when the moment came to truly step into the role of a transformative leader? Would his election of honesty invite more than what he bargained for? The crucial choice they faced loomed heavy in the air, and he felt the weight of it settle around him, both exhilarating and intimidating. As Mark stood before his colleagues, the anticipation crackled like static in the air. Their expressions, a mixture of skepticism and intrigue, became a canvas for his resolve. It was time to embody the change he sought, to transform the palpable tension into something constructive. He wasn't prepared to merely defend his vision, he had to inspire action. "Let us not forget," he began, interlocking his fingers to steady the tremor in his hands, "that change has often been uncomfortable but has also paved the way for extraordinary advancements. Innovation starts with us transforming our perspective." He locked eyes with Derek, who nodded subtly, a silent endorsement that gave Mark a pulse of confidence. The boardroom felt smaller as he continued. He had to connect, not only with numbers on a spreadsheet but with the hearts and minds of those seated before him. What if we encouraged open dialogue among all levels of our team? What if we eliminated barriers that stifle creativity and innovation? When we empower our employees, we create a culture that thrives on collaboration and mutual respect. Laura's expression remained stern, her skepticism a brick wall that Mark had yet to dismantle. The enormity of his undertaking pressed onto him. He understood that pushing against established norms wasn't just risky, it could alienate allies and foster resentment among the very colleagues he hoped would join him. How could he navigate this battlefield? Taking a risk, Mark shifted his narrative. Imagine if we implemented a mentorship program that paired experienced leaders with emerging talent. This strategy wouldn't just cultivate loyalty, it would ignite passion among our teams. It would show our commitment to their growth, which in turn will reflect our company's growth. As his voice echoed off the boardroom walls, he sensed a slight shift in the atmosphere. Jess's earlier contribution lingered like a spark igniting kindling. A flicker of muttered agreement floated from one of the junior directors. Perhaps a unified stance was on the horizon if he played his cards right, but as he continued, the weight of opposition anchored him to the ground. Mark was aware that constructing an inclusive future would require more than just persuasive words, it needed structural changes and internal commitment. Could he depend on this board to facilitate that change, especially with Laura at the helm of tradition? A tension rippled through him. What would he do if they rejected his ideas outright? Could he stand firm, or would he retreat into complacency, submitting to the same fate they had historically adhered to, a sterile office dominated by numbers and bottom lines? Mark knew this was more than just an internal debate, it was a test of his character. Then, something unexpected happened. Laura's gaze softened again, this time with visible deliberation flickering behind her cool facade. "It's a bold proposal, Mark," she finally said, her voice cutting through the tension. "But how do you foresee it impacting our bottom line in a concrete way? We must justify any expenditures with tangible results." Mark's heart raced, realizing he was being challenged to think on his feet. "The metrics can come later, Laura. I believe initial investment in our people translates into loyalty and productivity that far exceed those costs. Happy employees generate greater profit." As he finished, a mix of uncertainty and adrenaline charged through him. Answering Laura's question revealed an unexpected confidence that coursed through him like wildfire. He was no longer merely advocating for change, he had begun to own it. Yet, the stakes remained high. If they accepted his propositions, they could unleash a wave of transformation. But if they dismissed his vision, he might find himself trapped in a company culture that stifled him. The board fell into a contemplative silence, and Mark sensed that the tide was shifting, but doubt began to creep in. Was it naivete or courage driving him forward? It was time to find out, and then, just as he was grappling with the uncertainty, Derek spoke up, his voice steady and assertive. "I think we all need to consider what legacy we want to build. We're at a crossroads. The future could look very different based on the choices we make today." Mark felt a swell of hope mingled with apprehension. They were inching towards a collective reckoning, but how far were they willing to go? Would they have the courage to step into the unknown, or would they retreat into the safety of the familiar? As the weight of decision loomed heavy in the air, Mark's thoughts spiraled into uncharted territory. What if their acceptance came with unforeseen consequences? Would he find the strength to lead when the real challenges emerged, and would he be ready to face those who were determined to uphold the traditional status quo? With a deep breath, he braced himself for the potential answer. The moment of truth was upon them. As silence enveloped the boardroom, Mark's heart thumped loudly in his chest. He watched as each executive weighed Derek's words, and for a moment, it felt as though the very air was charged with an electric tension. Would they lean into change, or would they drown in a sea of tradition? Inwardly, he wrestled with his growing anxiety. Each face mirrored a distinct narrative, a personal story of investments, hopes, fears, and ambitions. If Derek could stir unease with a simple invitation for reflection, could Mark harness that energy? He had to. There was no turning back now. "Imagine," he pressed, feeling resolve swell within him, "being a company known not just for our financial stability, but for the nurtured talent walking these halls. We could attract top-tier professionals who want a workplace that values personal growth." Mark's voice strengthened, echoing with conviction. How many brilliant ideas have we lost simply because someone felt unheard? A mentorship program? It wouldn't just elevate the juniors, it would reinvigorate our senior staff too. It's a resource that fosters legacy, longevity, and productivity. He took a measured breath, an anchor amidst the rising swell of indecision. If they could see the beauty in investing in their own, perhaps they would begin to shift their focus from profit margins to human capital. The walls of resistance might crack, just enough to let in the light. "Laura, you mentioned the need for metrics. I understand that completely. But let's consider something beyond spreadsheets. Loyalty means less turnover. It means fewer recruitment costs. And when employees feel invested in, it directly affects their performance, doesn't it?" Mark locked eyes with her, hoping to breach that wall. For a fleeting moment, he detected something like doubt reflected back at him. And then, abruptly, Laura stood. What you're suggesting requires more than enthusiasm. It demands a structural overhaul, resources, time, and, more importantly, alignment from everyone here. Can we afford to divert from our current trajectory? The crack in her certainty sent shockwaves through Mark. Laura, he began cautiously, this isn't a diversion. It's realignment. It's all about adaptation. If we block what's new and cling to the now, we risk obsolescence. With that, he dug deep, energized by his conviction. Approaching the glass wall, he gestured outward. Look beyond those city skyline towers. The landscape is shifting, and if we want to thrive, we must evolve with it. Innovation cannot be a buzzword we trot out every year, it must be the pulse of our organization. As his fervor filled the air like a passionate breeze, he saw heads nodding. The momentum, subtle but pleasing, began to swell. Suggestions turned into ideas in the luminous air above them. But then came the familiar sight of dissent. Mark, passion 1T settle the finances, Jess interjected, eyeing him with renewed intensity. You must tie your ideas back into profitability more solidly. Happy employees can be an endless cycle of spending without measurable returns. With an inward jolt, realization hit Mark. He hadn't yet confronted the dissenters head-on. They weren't just uninterested in investment, they were guards of a collapsing fortress. If he wanted to catalyze momentum, he needed a strategic response to every potential roadblock. Without faltering, he approached it straightforwardly. What if we run a pilot program? Allocating a proportion of our budget for the mentorship initiative. We can track metrics, reduced turnover, enhanced employee engagement, and increased productivity. It will serve as a living case study for our effectiveness. The boardroom buzzed with murmurs. Was he merely staving off immediate criticism, or igniting in them the conviction to gamble on bettering their culture? It felt like a game of chess with each player calculating the risks of evolving or remaining static in time. Mark, Laura's firm voice cut through the branching discussions. Proposals require a plan, a clear structure. I understand the necessity, Laura. But change is messy. And sometimes, we need to wade through that discomfort to emerge stronger. I am suggesting we begin the conversation, not perfect solutions. Give me a chance to gather our people's feedback, then strategize accordingly. Mixed reactions floated back to him, murmurs of contemplation, hesitance, and proactive engagement. With a final glance, he caught Derek's supportive nod, a reminder that sometimes a little affirmation could ignite a larger battle for belief. But would all their acknowledgments solidify into action, or would he find limitations in their commitment? The urgency of choice crackled beneath the surface. Mark's mind whirred with the foundations of change. Were they now ready to face the real demands of embracing that responsibility? As skepticism collided with ambition in a crescendo of determination, Mark braced himself. The time had come to face not only the board but the very narratives that had kept him bound until now. Decisions were no longer a matter of theory, they had become a battleground for individual convictions and their direct confrontation with tradition. Mark could almost hear the clock ticking. Would their votes symbolize the dawn of a new legacy or merely another chapter in the unyielding passage of antiquated governance? Whatever their decision, it would reveal the limits of his resolve and dictate the path ahead. The tension in the boardroom lingered like an uninvited guest, pressing against Mark as he awaited the response of his colleagues. Each passing moment felt agonizing, stretching out in his mind. He could sense the undercurrents of doubt, anxiety, and frustration swirling around the table, but behind it all, a glimmer of hope ignited within him. This was more than just a proposal, it was a core belief he had nurtured, a vision of a future that set the stage for unlocking the potential of both the company and its people. A pilot program is a good step forward, Laura finally spoke, although her tone still held an academic distance. But how will you ensure it aligns with our long-term objectives? Mark seized on the opportunity, his confidence bolstered. By establishing a timeline, including milestones that directly correlate to our financial goals. We can conduct employee surveys before and after the pilot, track retention rates, and compare productivity metrics with control groups. This isn't reckless enthusiasm, it's strategic. He found himself pacing slightly, energized by the rhythm of the discussion, a side of him that had been dormant surging forth. The flutters of uncertainty within his gut began to settle, replaced by a fierce determination. Derek interjected, "Mark's right. We don't need to throw the entire boat overboard, we can test the waters first. It's about risk management." "Exactly." Mark affirmed, channeling his inner advocate, "This initiative can become a cornerstone project, offering us data that not only support the program but provide insights we haven't even explored yet. Imagine being pioneers in workplace culture innovation." Yet Jess's sharp gaze remained fixed on him, a fortress of skepticism. "But how do you know that mentoring will yield tangible profits? You can't deny that we are operating in a competitive market where numbers speak louder than words." With the challenge laid before him, Mark felt the old nerves rise again, yet this time, they didn't overwhelm him. Instead, they crystallized into a clear challenge he embraced. Each mentor-mentee interaction can be tailored to yield practical results. It isn't only about moral investment, it's about cultivating skills that will drive revenue. More engaged employees lower turnover costs, enhance customer relationships, and drive innovation. Were the costs of previous turnover measured? The murmurs of discontent began to soften, heads nodded in thoughtful contemplation. Mark sensed that the room was shifting, the tide heaving with the potential for transformation rather than retreat. Yet, in the deepest recesses of his mind, a familiarity gnawed at him. Was he merely reflecting the echo of their doubts? The voice of fear hid beneath the whispers of certainty he now projected. A pang of concern flickered. What if he wasn't prepared for what was to come? What if the board ultimately rejected his ideas? Pushing that thought aside, he focused on the task at hand. "I'd like to propose a follow-up meeting. A chance to engage more deeply with each executive about potential pitfalls, metrics, and psychological elements associated with employee satisfaction and performance." This provocation landed softly, a subtle invitation for deeper dialogue. Yet, it wasn't the singular outcome he hoped for, but what he saw next surprised even him. He caught Laura's gaze, collective sparks of interest ignited within her, and for the first time, a tangible shift resonated. "I think we may want to explore that," she agreed, her voice softer, the layers of resistance peeling away in real time. Mark glanced around the room, the collective rhythm of possibility resonating through the air like a heartbeat. "Thank you. I believe we are at a pivotal moment, one that could redefine our identity." As discussions broke out again, Mark found himself eavesdropping on snippets, ideas blossoming like spring buds. There it was, the emergence of collaboration over conflict. Unbeknownst to them, he had wrestled his own fears this day, stepping boldly into vulnerability before a crowd that could dismantle him. But would this newfound sense of unity flourish into actionable change? Would his peers allow themselves to step beyond the walls of their well-guarded convictions and embrace the unnerving, yet invigorating path of uncertainty? The tension had morphed from trepidation into an electric sense of possibility, yet doubt still hovered at the edges. As he stepped away from the table, a thrill coursed through him. Tomorrow would reveal the true depth of his courage. What awaited as the seconds rolled close, pressing heavily against their fateful decisions? Unbeknownst to Mark, the true test awaited just beyond the conference room doors, a challenge that would shed light on his resolve, forcing him to confront not just their hesitations but his own latent insecurities. What if he had miscalculated the emotional landscape of his peers? In the heart of this uncertainty, the time for reckoning had come. Mark stepped outside the boardroom, the buzz of tentative excitement still clanging in his ears, but the momentary thrill quickly faded into a cavern of uncertainty. Each step along the polished floor seemed heavier than the last, grounding him in a reality that felt both exhilarating and daunting. He had articulated a vision, a pathway toward transformation, yet now ambiguity once again wrapped its tendrils around his thoughts, pulling him in every direction. Had he truly read the room correctly? The flicker of optimism he noticed from Laura might have been merely a polite acknowledgement rather than a commitment to change. As soon as he reached his office, he closed the door, isolating himself from the world that felt suddenly chaotic. He leaned against the desk, fists clenched, his mind a torrent of thoughts about tomorrow's follow-up. Mark opened his laptop, unlocking a document filled with his initial notes. It read more like a manifesto of his ambitions, colored with the doubts he carried. He recalled the countless nights he had spent brainstorming, diving deep into literature on employee engagement and workplace efficacy. The numbers supported his belief, but statistics alone wouldn't drive change. People would. The familiar cacophony of voices intruded on his thoughts through the thin walls, the sound of laughter and camaraderie drifting in from the break room, a reminder of the very culture he wished to improve. Would they stand with him? Or would they become yet another formidable wall in his journey? A sharp knock on his door jolted him from his reverie. It was Sophie, his loyal assistant. "Mark, you wanted to review the feedback from the last employee survey?" she asked, her voice gentle yet infused with urgency. "Of course, Sophie." "Bring it in," he replied, sitting upright, shifting his mindset back to focus. As she handed him a handful of printed papers, he noticed her expression contained something more than just professional efficiency. There was curiosity, perhaps even a hint of concern. "Do you really believe this will take hold?" she asked, her eyes searching his for sincerity. Mark paused, contemplating his words. "I have to believe it. But it's not just about belief, it's about action. I can't do it alone, I need them to buy in too." Sophie nodded, visibly digesting his response. "Maybe you should talk to some of them directly. Perhaps gather a small group to discuss their views. Show you're committed to their input, not just the numbers." The invitation to connect beyond the formalities sparked a realization within him. "That's brilliant, Sophie. Thank you. A forum to voice concerns, to talk candidly might help demystify the process and, who knows, maybe it will rally support. Just make sure they know it's a safe space," she added, a note of caution in her voice. "It's important for them to feel secure enough to share openly, especially about something as personal as mentorship." Her words resonated, revealing a weakness in his prior planning. Perhaps he had been too focused on metrics, neglecting the emotional dimensions necessary for authentic engagement. Mark jotted a quick note in the margins of the report before leaning back, emboldened. They could become allies in this mission, it didn't have to feel so lonely. Fueled by a fresh perspective, he decided he would hold the forum the very next week. It would serve as an empowerment session, a roundtable to genuinely listen and invite their thoughts on the proposed changes. Domesticating the fears residing in the boardroom wasn't just about strategy, it was about personal connections and fostering a culture of trust. His thoughts raced ahead, imagining the possibilities. What discoveries awaited him in these conversations? What raw truths from employees might surface, embedding their stories within the very fabric of the mentorship program? His hands trembled slightly with anticipation as he began crafting a loose agenda, but thoughts of Jess's skepticism slowly crept back. Could this be enough to sway her? Would she see vulnerability as strength or weakness? As he continued to outline his plans, a shadow of doubt lingered at the back of his mind. He needed this to work. More than that, he needed to confront his own underlying anxieties, the fear of failure gnawing at him like an unrelenting pest. The stakes were high, and the thought of facing those hesitations felt almost suffocating. Mark rose from his desk and paced the room, mentally preparing himself for what lay ahead. He realized that accepting feedback and engaging with his team in an open dialogue would not just be a strategic move, it was a personal reckoning. What deeper truths could he uncover about himself in these discussions? Would he finally reconcile the staunch believer he had become with the uncertainty that often plagued him? As Mark glanced out the window at the sprawling city beyond, he felt the weight of potential on his shoulders, both daunting and exhilarating. The room that bred doubt could soon become a vessel for empowerment, but it would take every ounce of courage he could muster to break through those barriers. With a deep breath, he steeled himself. Tomorrow's meeting wouldn't just test his professional capabilities, it would force him to confront the essence of who he was and who he aspired to be. Just as he began to feel an inkling of excitement about the day ahead, another thought struck him. What if he discovered something about a colleague that could fundamentally shift his perspective? The moment of revelation was nearing, and the pulse quickened within. The morning dawned crisp and clear, an unusual brightness filtering through the clouds, yet Mark felt shrouded in his own murky doubts. As he made his way to the office, every car he passed seemed to mirror his uncertainty. Today was the day he inhaled deeply, attempting to catch the surge of optimism he so desperately needed. But the air felt thick in his lungs, stifling his confidence. Entering the building, Mark was greeted with routine pleasantries, a few friendly waves and smiles from colleagues, but they felt distant, almost unintelligible. Each polite exchange left him feeling increasingly isolated, as if he were peering through glass rather than truly engaging in conversation. He shuffled down the hallway, the heaviness in his chest deepening with each step toward his office. Sophie waited inside as if she anticipated his arrival. Her presence anchored him momentarily, and he could sense her quiet support radiating palpably in the room. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, tilting her head slightly as she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Ready as I'll ever be," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The agenda lay open on his desk, but he sensed the pressure of expectations looming like storm clouds. As the clock inched closer to the meeting time, Mark reviewed the list of attendees. His heart raced when he noticed Jess's name among the participants. Would she be open to what he proposed? Her skepticism echoed in his mind like a persistent whisper. "It's just a forum, not a crusade." He tried to convince himself, yet the notion seemed increasingly naive. People began to filter in, casual conversations knitting the room with a brief thread of assurance. But what would happen when they sat in a circle, confronted by the weight of candid discussion? As he stood before them, the nervous energy in the room reminded him of the many miles he had traversed, from initial ideation to this pivotal moment of realization. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady yet lacking the fervor he desired. "Today is about opening dialogue, providing a space for thoughts and concerns regarding our mentorship initiatives." Each word felt like a pebble dropped into a still pond, the ripples uncertain yet promising. Mark invited thoughts, encouraging participants to speak freely. At first, the discussions unfolded with moderate engagement, but gradually, the atmosphere thickened with emotion. Fears that had likely simmered beneath the surface poured out into the conversation. Their professional development had been neglected amidst the everyday grind. Jess's hesitation turned out to be lesser than he anticipated. She shared her frustrations candidly about insufficient mentorship, and the residual echoes of missed opportunities resonated in the room. Mark felt an understanding bond forming, one that hinted at trust and the potential for real change. In a striking moment, Sam, a junior analyst, spoke vulnerably about an experience that had left him feeling invisible in an ocean of expectations. "It's tough to navigate this place when you feel lost," he admitted, sounding fragile yet resolute as the words tumbled out. Mark's mind raced. This was the human connection he had been searching for. The anecdotes shared revealed not just obstacles but also aspirations. They challenged his understanding of what true mentorship could embody, promoting not solely career growth but emotional intelligence. However, rather than igniting a full-blown revelation, the conversation had ignited a quiet storm within him. Mark recognized his own shortcomings, his prior focus on numbers, his fear of confrontation, and the veil he had placed over his motivations to serve as a guide. This connection anticipated a shift, not merely for the employees but for himself as well. As reflections swirled around the room, Mark held the floor, navigating a newfound realization that he had underestimated the depth of shared experience. This gathering enforced a salient truth within him: personal revelations paved the way for collective empowerment. At last, the dialogue drifted toward closure, but just before he wrapped up, something compelled him to stir the waters one last time. "What do you want to see change within our framework of mentorship?" His question hung in the air, succession resting in the space between uncertainty and possibility. He sensed a growing quietude, eyes darting among one another, uncertainty mixing gingerly with anticipation. What weighty truths would emerge when he invited their collective aspirations for progress? With each pulse of silence, Mark felt a tug at the essence of his journey. The conversation hadn't merely scratched the surface, it had invited him to engage beyond the confines of his own fears. As he awaited their response, anxiety surged, but this time it felt different. It was the thrill of challenge colliding with opportunity, igniting an eagerness. What discoveries awaited him as they voiced their perceptions? And would he have the courage to act on the profound insights unveiled? Just as he sensed an impending shift, a familiar voice pierced through the quiet. What will happen if we don't just talk, but take actual steps to change things? It was Jess, her eyes directly locked onto his, a challenge hidden within the query. Mark didn't have a ready answer. But as he stood there, anticipation coursing through his veins, he knew one thing: a spark had ignited within him, and now there was no turning back. The moment had come to confront not just what they needed as a team, but to dissect the essence of his own leadership. Tomorrow, he thought, he would have to step even further into the unknown, starting by revisiting his initial vision with a focus not just on metrics but on impact. What startling realities would he face within his own metamorphosis as a leader? Mark Reynolds stood at the podium, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Today was not just another day in the boardroom, this was the culmination of not just a battle for Mia's recognition, but a personal transformation born from his willingness to confront the truths he had long avoided. The faces seated around him, once a mosaic of skepticism and indifference, now flickered with faint glimmers of anticipation. Weeks of discussion, forums, and the candid sharing of experiences had set the stage for this defining moment. Mark took a deep breath, a fresh sense of confidence surging through him as he prepared to share the outcomes of their recent initiatives. Thank you all for joining me today. After implementing the pilot mentorship program and conducting our employee engagement survey, we have discovered some remarkable insights, he began, articulating each word with clarity and purpose. As he shared the data reflecting increased engagement and lower turnover due to the mentorship efforts, he felt the energy in the room shift. He noticed nods of approval and expressions of intrigue, recognition of an underlying truth had infected the board. Their paradigm had begun to crack. The numbers weren't just favorable, they told a story of evolution, a narrative he had long sought to share but was afraid to exploit. However, he continued, the true measure of success isn't solely in percentages, it's in the connections we've forged, the voices we've elevated, and the authentic culture we're now building. One of our team members shared that feeling seen allowed them to excel, to thrive, and not just survive. He paused for effect, allowing the room to digest the gravity of his words. As he glanced at Mia, seated among the colleagues who once overlooked her, he saw the journey reflected in her eyes. They had both evolved, she, stepping into the light she was always meant to occupy, and he, finally stepping up to the responsibilities of genuine leadership. The groundwork we lay from here onward isn't just about profit margins, it's about cultivating a legacy, he emphasized, his voice unwavering. We're not merely a corporation, we are a community that thrives on talent, respect, and inclusivity. Each of you is vital to this journey. A silence enveloped the room once more. It wasn't an inquisition but rather a contemplative pause. Mark sensed the board's hesitation dissipating, replaced by contemplation of a holistic vision. Had he really unlocked something monumental? His internal landscape had transformed. The fear that once held him captive began dissolving, replaced with a solid foundation of possibility. Breaking the tension, Derek spoke up, Mark, these changes are significant. I see merit where I previously overlooked it, and I believe we must be prepared to capitalize on this momentum. Let me pledge my support in being the internal champion for this culture change. The ripple effect of Derek's statement sent waves through the room. Other voices echoed Derek's sentiment, each expressing an eagerness to support the evolving culture of their workplace. As Mark breathed deeply, he reveled in the realization of collective progress. Others were ready to accompany him into this new age of leadership. Moments and exchanges that once seemed daunting had crystallized into a profound legacy. The company was no longer a place solely of competition and numbers, it was morphing into a family united by vision and purpose. What lay ahead was no longer uncertain, it was just the beginning of forging deeper connections, transforming an office into a united workplace replete with diverse voices, innovation, and sustainability. Later that afternoon, Mark reflected as he stood alone in the now vibrant hallways of an office transformed by the power of dialogue and assertive action. Converts to a mission that would ensure no one felt invisible, he no longer looked into a mirror of self-critique, but toward a future brimming with possibility. He had conquered his fears, the facade of who he was had crumbled entirely, revealing a leader who prioritized people over profits. That he took one last glance at the office, where laughter erupted from rooms of collaborative creation. Mark Reynolds had stepped fully into his role not just as a CEO, but as an architect of change, marked by genuine intent and visionary leadership. The moment of truth had indeed been one of profound individual resolution. No longer was he just a figurehead detached from those he led, he was part of a living, breathing organization resonating with the voices of all its members. The transformation had been substantial not only for Mia and his colleagues but for himself, as well. Now was the moment to act on this personal achievement. To celebrate this triumph, he pledged to nurture the connections, to advocate for employees' voices, and to genuinely support their growth as he had done with Mia. This was just the beginning of a new era, an era he had not only envisioned but had taken the decisive steps to create. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending below. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.